This is M. Night Shyamalan's cult favourite from the year 2000, and if you ever want to see a night and day difference between Blu-ray and 4K, then this is it. Bruce Willis plays David Dunn, who we first meet on a train. The train derails and crashes, killing every passenger on board except for David, who emerges without a single scratch, and this causes him to question exactly why he survived. Elijah Price, played by Samuel L. Jackson, takes an interest in David's case, as the pair of them seem to be complete opposites. Elijah's bones fracture at the slightest knock, whereas David seems unbreakable. Thus begins this unconventional, quiet, thoughtful, mysterious film, often shot from a distance with very long takes. To summarise, it's a comic book superhero origin film. I remember seeing an interview with M. Night Shyamalan years ago, might have been on the Signs DVD as an extra, where he talked about how many people tell him that Unbreakable was among their favourite films, and Night replied that, "Where were you in the year 2000 when it was released?" Words to that effect, and that always suggested to me that this film was a bit of a flop. However, with a budget of $75 million and a worldwide gross of $248 million, that seems to belie that story. So perhaps after the magnificent performance of his previous film The Sixth Sense in the cinema, which was a major blockbuster that I think everyone went to see at the time, and I remember people at work discussing it, so perhaps it was just following the success of The Sixth Sense that expectations for Unbreakable were greater than they really should have been. I didn't see the film at the cinema, I only saw it when I was loaned the DVD shortly after it came out, and that is the last time I saw it, so I was delighted on our recent trip to HMV when I went in and there was Unbreakable on the 4K shelves. It was quite a surprise, and it doesn't disappoint. The aspect ratio is in the Panavision scope frame of approximately 2.4 to 1, 2.35 to 1. I know that often causes confusion, but it is an approximation of the scope frame, and there might be slight variations occasionally depending on a Super 35 or an anamorphic 35 shoot. I don't really know for sure on that, but whatever, it's minimal and you can always get away with a little cropping anyway. The sound is DTS-HD 5.1, and I know that will disappoint some people who will want it to have been remixed into DTS-X or Dolby Atmos. However, I can report that the sound is perfectly suited to the film in here, and the surround is lovely. It really does envelop you at times, but it's subtle, and if you feel that it is not all enveloping enough, then one suggestion I can make is to maybe put your rear speakers up higher, because in here on our THX 5.1 it's not the ideal location for the rear tripole speakers, but they are up high because there's nowhere else for them to go and there's not enough room for them on the sides, and that does give a Dolby Atmos like effect as it bounces off the beams in the ceiling. So it's all very interesting how this film sounds, and I think if you do get your speakers up high at the back, particularly if they're dipoles or tripoles, you'll be very hard pushed to differentiate the difference between all these sound systems. A lot of this film is intentionally dark, and I'm pleased to say that the mastering for this 4K doesn't appear to have attempted to brighten it. The colour and density are very similar to looking at a film print, and that's just about as good as any of us can hope. I would really like to compare this film on 35mm because it really does have a filmic look. However, because of the dark nature of it, you may feel that a few scenes look a little odd or unrealistic, but I think that is just due to the dark nature. But for me, again, it's like looking at a 35mm print in here, and as many of you watching this know, I do actually screen quite a few 35mm prints in this little home cinema. As I said in my introduction, there is a night and day difference between the 4K in here and the Blu-ray. And this time it's not only the colour and the density, it's the sharpness too. A clear edge on the 4K over the Blu-ray. And as an example, I think it's chapter 10. There's a queue to go into an American football stadium, and if you look in the distance down the queue of people, you can pick out the sharpness in their faces. Look at the same scene on the Blu-ray, and that sharpness just isn't there. In the following chapter, I think it's chapter 11, Samuel L. Jackson's character follows a villain who David Dunn, Bruce Willis, has said is carrying a gun, and he wants to go to find out if he really is carrying a gun, because there was no way either of them could have seen it. And he's at the top of the stairs calling to this villain, and behind him is a grey sky, and on the Blu-ray you can see excessive film grain, which ordinarily wouldn't really be noticeable, but I noticed because on the 4K I was at the back of the room, obviously projecting, but I couldn't see any film grain at all, none. I'm sure if I'd have pressed my face to the screen I'd see some, but nevertheless, for me in here it was invisible. So it's not only the colour and the density, the sharpness is superior as well. Now the reason I think that is I suspect that the Blu-ray is the old Blu-ray and it's just been put in this 4K pack, and the new 4K is a new transfer. And that will mean that the new 4K has either come from the original camera negative or the interpositive or the internegative, which I've explained many times on this channel, whereas the Blu-ray seems to come from a 35mm print. So it would be great to get that 35mm print in here and project it and see if a general release print looks identical to this 4K, because I think it will be extremely close. I think all the extras on this disc, they're only on the Blu-ray, there's none on the 4K. I think we've seen them all before on the DVD and presumably on the previous Blu-ray release as well. So there's nothing new to see there. And I think possibly the only other thing I should mention is James Newton Howard's score. It's another beautiful score. I don't know how these science fiction and fantasy films keep coming up with such wonderful themes and scores, but they do, and James Newton Howard's is another one. Perfectly suits the film. So, would I recommend this film? It's a difficult one really. I am absolutely chuffed to bits to have this one on 4K. It really is a revelation to see it properly, just like being in a cinema. But I think if you haven't seen the film, it would help if you were into comic book superheroes. If you're not, then maybe this one is a bit of a gamble, but I think it's a good film nevertheless. It's a different type of film again. As I said, it's unconventional and it's an interesting watch. And Bruce Willis, Samuel L. Jackson, they're all really good in this film again, and the quiet, thoughtful nature of it makes it something different, something rather special. So I think if you're into great 4K releases, then this one's going to be for you. It won't be one of the best 4Ks in your collection. I mean, remember, it has come from a 35mm anamorphic negative, I believe, so it's not going to be up there with the best 70mm shoots and the best 65mm shoots, such as Tenet and Murder on the Orient Express. But it's pretty good. It's variable because of the dark nature, but it is very good. It's not as good as Jaws, which I think I'm right in saying was scanned at 6K and seemed to squeeze just that little bit extra out of the anamorphic 35mm frame, and not quite as good either as Apocalypse Now, which actually came from the interpositive because the original camera negative for the original cut no longer exists. So it's been an interesting process looking at Unbreakable, and I think that in itself is interesting because it's such an interesting film. So until the next video, bye bye for now.